Dear Diary, the first thing I did with my newfound freedom to roam the vast Paldea region was go back into the school. I realized that the entrance hall actually has more than one level, and it hadn't really occurred to me to try going up the stairs before. Probably a bit preconditioned by like Sword and Shield, where that kind of thing would have been just for aesthetics and might have been roped off or something like that. But I'm glad I went back because there were a lot more books. Still not as much as are on display, but there was quite a bit to read. A lot of little lore tidbits to get me excited for what I might discover later, especially in the Violet book. That one was on the first floor, so I could have seen it when I was exploring it the first time around, but it is a little bit harder to spot compared to all of the green books, so it was actually important for me to go back because it gave me another chance to run into it, and I did. It did feel like a lot of the lore was packed into this one book, where it probably would have worked better to be more spread out throughout all of the books, but still. When I finally did step back out of the school, I noticed that we have a day and night cycle and weather cycles. It makes sense plot-wise why up until you reach the school it's basically daytime all the time, but that section was so long that I was actually wondering if they were going to be there at all. So I'm glad that they are. I spent most of the day exploring. I wanted to make sure that I accomplished at least one like significant thing for the day, but I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't being super objective and just going from goal to goal to goal. Riding around on Miraidon is nice. It feels a little bit slower than I would have expected for just the way that it looks. It looks like a very fast Pokemon, and it's not, but it's a good speed, I think, for exploring. But I guess I keep getting the impression that Miraidon will be able to ride on water eventually. Like Rotom Bike water mode, right? There was one time in particular where I walked into a pool, and instead of getting the message that I managed to scramble out of the water, Miraidon showed up. I wasn't riding on Miraidon before, and suddenly I'm riding on Miraidon, and I'm riding on the water in the pool, and I managed to jump out. And things like that happened in a couple of other places as well. So I keep getting the impression that Miraidon will be able to go on water, but every time I try to go over something a little bit deeper, I have to scramble out of the water. And that just feels a bit clunky as a way to gatekeep my direction. I imagine that eventually that won't be a problem, but for right now, having Miraidon show up of its own accord when I'm on the water, but then not actually be able to go over deep water feels kind of frustrating. I got to experience my first Tera Raids. They feel pretty good. They feel more fast-paced than Max Raids were in Sword and Shield, but it's also a little bit harder to keep track of what your allies are up to, how they are doing. I haven't tried this in co-op yet though. I've only done this with AI allies, so maybe it's a little bit different and a little bit better when you're with actual people. But it definitely feels like the battles flow much better than Max Raids did, which is good. And throughout all of this exploration, I encountered a lot of new Pokemon. The first few that I encountered, namely Knackley, Maschiff, and Smoliv, although I already knew about Smoliv before, they reinforced my impression that this generation of Pokemon was not looking like Pokemon so much. They were really simple. But thankfully, those weren't the only ones. Actually, the first Pokemon that gave me more hope for this generation was... Shoot, what was it called? I only remember its nickname. Spidops, Tarountula's evolution. Tarantula was my first Pokemon to evolve, so that was pretty exciting. Seeing the evolution on the overworld was really cool, and I really felt like, okay, now this feels more like a Pokemon. It's still a little bit simple, but it's going in a good direction. Doesn't look like it'll evolve again, but it does give me hope for other Pokemon to make similar changes. The one thing that was a little bit disappointing was that they took away the manual evolution trigger from Pokemon Legends, and I understand that that was because there was no held item, so there was no Everstone, but it was really cool to just have that as an option to just evolve your Pokemon whenever you want, so it's a little disappointing that they took that away. But thankfully, after Spidops, I did encounter a few other Pokemon that I thought were pretty good, as Pokemon at least, even though not all of them were particularly exciting to me. Capsicid, Nimble, Flittle, those did feel more like Pokemon. My Sprigatito evolved as well into Floragato. Not a great name, but the Pokemon itself actually looks really good. I like it, especially for a middle stage. It doesn't totally feel like a middle stage. It feels comparable to something like a Berserker or Thievul, for example, in terms of how complete a design it feels like it is and how detailed it is. It doesn't look like it's not going to evolve, but it also feels much more mature as a design than the middle stages of the Gen 8 starters, for example. So that gives me some hope for the final stages. But probably my favorite Pokemon that I've encountered so far is Charcadet. It doesn't look the most like a Pokemon, but it looks interesting. It fits what I like in a creature design, or at least in a character design. So I'm excited to have this one as a more regular member of the team. Although I have been rotating team members really regularly to just kind of get all of the new mons growing up at a reasonably even rate. I only intend to keep that going until they evolve, and I know that they're not going to evolve further, but still. My favorite moment of exploration was going up a watchtower. I expected there to be items at the top, or maybe even just a good view of the area to help me orient and figure out exactly where I want to go. But when I got to the very top, there was a chest. And of course, this stood out to me. There's never been item chests in Pokemon before, so I was already pretty wary going in, but I was surprised and excited to find out that that was actually Gimmickle. The Pokemon that I'd been seeing all over the place and just getting their coins, this is how you actually encounter one. They are mimics, essentially, just, I guess, hanging out in corners, probably in multiple places in the overworld, but just waiting for you to notice and go check it out and engage in battle. It seems to be a very weak Pokemon at the moment, and it's leveling pretty slow, so I can only imagine that it'll evolve into something interesting. Like, it's feeling like Applin, for example, right? I don't know what a tiny little Pokemon that lives in a chest evolves into, but I've got high hopes. That one big thing that I accomplished today was the first gym. I took on and beat the first gym leader. It's a first gym. It's not the most exciting. The gym test was really straightforward. The theme of the gym leader was a little bit confusing, to be honest, because the whole city is centered on the olive harvest, so it feels like it would be a grass type gym. And the gym leader is a baker, and since in Pokemon it seems like food Pokemon are fairy type, it would make sense for it to be a fairy type gym, but it's neither of those. It's a bug type gym. So I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it all fits together, but I guess it's fine. The thing that did surprise me was that in this battle, the gym leader's ace Pokemon was not a bug type. She sent out Teddiursa, and I was like, wow, a gym where not every Pokemon is exactly the same type. But then, of course, it turned out that it was a Teddiursa with Bug as its Tera type. I really should have seen that coming, but I didn't, so it nearly wrecked my Sprigatito, but thankfully I did have some Bug-oriented Pokemon. I had Flamigo with me and made quick work of the Teddiursa, so we're all good. I feel like my thoughts are really disjointed on this one, but I guess that's part of the nature of open world games. It's just a lot of different things to go at and not a very linear approach to things. So I'm trying to find a way to group things, but it is a little bit difficult. I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on was just how I've been feeling for these first 2 days that Scarlet and Violet are what Sword and Shield should have been. There are so many features in these games that are either developed from something that was in Sword and Shield, like the Tera Raids, or fully realized versions of what we had in Sword and Shield. Like the open areas, the exploration of the enormous landscape is what the wild areas should have been. There's also features that are kind of lateral, like sandwiches and picnics instead of curry and camp. They feel like they're very much in the same spirit, but not necessarily one is better than the other. I know that I'm still very much in the beginning of this game. There is still a lot for me to discover, so I can't say that this game does everything that Sword and Shield wanted to do. But I do get the impression that for Sword and Shield, these features were unfinished. Like they got it to a point where it was good enough and not actually perfected. And I'm not going to say it's perfected at this point because that's kind of impossible, but it feels like Scarlet and Violet are much more fully realized to what they're trying to do than Sword and Shield were. So as much as I might have problems with, say, the graphical quality, or more importantly, the graphical style, at least I can give these games credit for, so far, feeling like they actually did what they were trying to do. And that's a good thing. I'm really looking forward to what the rest of the game is going to be like. So thanks for listening. This was Umbreon Libris, and I'll see you in the next chapter.